What happens when you drop a single human onto a planet that has killed every other species that dared to land on its surface? A world where the very air burns lungs, where predators hunt in packs of 30, and where the ground itself tries to swallow anything that moves. The Galactic Council had seen thousands of species attempt survival on Cathara Prime. Advanced civilizations with technology that could reshape matter itself had failed within hours. European military forces equipped with the finest armor and weapons had been wiped out in minutes. Even the legendary Vorthak warriors, known throughout the galaxy for their incredible resilience, had lasted mere days. But they had never seen a human try. When the transport ship Destiny's Edge crash-landed on Cathara Prime with only one survivor, the watching alien fleets expected to witness another tragic failure. They prepared their recording devices to document yet another species' inevitable doom on the galaxy's most lethal world. What they witnessed instead would shake the very foundation of everything they thought they knew about survival, adaptability, and the terrifying potential that lay dormant within the species called humanity. A structural engineer from Earth, and how he turned the galaxy's most feared Deathworld into his home. Marcus Chen's eyes snapped open to the acrid smell of burning metal and the distant sound of his ship's hull creaking under alien gravity. But he could shatter across purple sand dunes that stretched endlessly toward twin crimson suns. But now it was twisted wreckage scattered across purple sand dunes that stretched endlessly toward twin crimson suns. Blood trickled from a gash above his left eye as he pulled himself from the emergency pod. The patient. The impact had been brutal, but the pod's systems had kept him alive through what should have been certain death. Around him, the landscape of Cathara Prime stretched out like something from humanity's worst nightmares. Jagged crystalline formations jutted from the ground like broken teeth, while steam hissed from vents that glowed with internal heat. The air itself seemed to shimmer with toxic particles that made his lungs burn with each breath. High above in the planet's orbit, 12 different alien vessels maintained their silent vigil. The Galactic Council had been tracking the human ship since it had been pulled off course by Cathara Prime's unusual gravitational field. What had started as a routine rescue mission had quickly turned into something much more significant when they realized where the ship was headed. Commander Zeph High of the Altarian fleet watched through his ship's advanced sensors as the small bipedal figure moved through the wreckage below. His 4 eyes tracked every movement, while his communications officer maintained an open channel to the other observing vessels. The humans survived the initial impact, he reported to the assembled fleet commanders. Probability calculations suggest survival duration of approximately 4.7 hours before environmental factors prove fatal. Captain Mordak of the hegemony destroyer Iron Fang let out a series of clicks that served as his species' equivalent of laughter. 4 hours seems optimistic. Look at the size of that creature. It cannot weigh more than 90 kilograms. The health averaged 3 times that mass. And they hunt in packs of 30 or more. Dr. Yelena from the scientific vessel Knowledge Seeker adjusted her observation equipment to focus more closely on the human. As a xenobiologist who had spent decades studying the remains of failed expeditions to Cathara Prime, she found herself genuinely curious about how this particular species would meet its end. The atmospheric composition alone should prove lethal within 6 hours. The sulfur content is nearly 3 times the threshold for most carbon-based life forms. His engineering mind was already assessing the situation with the methodical approach that had made him one of Earth's most requested structural specialists. The ship's emergency kit had survived the crash intact, giving him basic tools, a small fabricator unit, and enough rations for 5 days. More importantly, his personal toolkit had made it through the impact undamaged. The first priority was shelter. Marcus could feel the planet's twin suns beating down on him with an intensity that would cause severe burns within an hour of exposure. His emergency suit provided some protection, but it wouldn't last long against this environment. And assess his resources before the full heat of the day made movement impossible. The wreckage of the Destiny's Edge was scattered across nearly a kilometer of desert, but Marcus could see several sections that might provide salvageable materials. The ship's hull was composed of reinforced titanium steel alloy, while the interior contained everything from atmospheric recycling systems to hydroponic growing chambers. If he could recover enough components, he might be able to create a basic survival shelter. Moving through the debris field required careful navigation. The purple sand beneath his feet was unstable, occasionally giving way to reveal steaming pits that descended far deeper than his portable scanner could measure. The strange six-legged creatures the size of house cats scuttled between the wreckage, their chitinous shells reflecting the light from the twin suns in prismatic patterns. They showed no immediate interest in him, but Marcus made careful note of their behavior and movement patterns. The first useful discovery came from what had been the ship's hydroponics bay. The growing chambers were smashed beyond repair, but the nutrient synthesizers were still functional. More importantly, the atmospheric processors that had maintained the growing environment were intact and could potentially be repurposed for a small habitat. Marcus carefully extracted the key components and began mentally cataloging how they might be integrated into a shelter design. From the observation fleet above, the aliens watched with growing interest as the human demonstrated systematic problem-solving abilities that surpassed their initial expectations. Instead of panicking or attempting to signal for rescue, the creature was methodically examining wreckage and collecting specific items according to some internal plan. Fascinating. Dr. Yelena murmured as she recorded the human's activities. It appears to be following some sort of salvage protocol. See how it prioritizes certain components over others? There's definite intelligence behind its actions. Commander Zephahay adjusted his primary sensors to track the human more closely. Intelligence will not save it from the crystalline spiders. Protocol, when the primary sun reaches its zenith. That gives the creature perhaps 90 minutes before it faces its first real test. The crystalline spiders of Cathara Prime were the planet's apex predators, evolved over millions of years to be perfect killing machines in this harsh environment. Standing nearly 2 meters tall and armed with limbs that could punch through reinforced armor plating, they had eliminated every previous expedition to land on the planet. Their transparent crystalline shells made them nearly invisible against the desert landscape, while their pack hunting strategies had proven effective against even the most advanced military forces. Marcus continued his salvage operations, unaware of the approaching danger. He had managed to recover 3 atmospheric processors, a small fusion power cell, and nearly 50 square meters of hull plating that could be repurposed as construction material. His emergency fabricator could create joining materials and basic tools from the mineral deposits he'd found near several of the steaming vents. The real breakthrough came when he discovered the ship's emergency shelter system, still partially intact. Designed for temporary use during ship repairs in hostile environments, it consisted of a collapsible framework that could support environmental shields and basic life support. While damaged, Marcus could see how it might be modified and expanded using materials from the wreckage. As he worked to extract the shelter system, movement in his peripheral vision made him freeze. 3 of the cat-sized creatures he'd observed earlier had approached to within 10 meters, their prismatic shells shifting colors as they moved. Unlike before, these creatures were showing definite interest in his activities, moving in coordinated patterns that suggested pack behavior. Marcus slowly reached for the plasma cutter he'd recovered from the ship's engineering section. The creatures immediately responded to his movement, fanning out to approach from multiple angles. Their shells began producing a low harmonic vibration that seemed to communicate across the group, and Marcus realized he was observing some form of coordinated hunting behavior. The first creature launched itself at him with surprising speed, its 6 legs propelling it through the air in a precise arc aimed at his chest. Marcus rolled aside and brought the plasma cutter up in a defensive position, its energy beam slicing through the creature's midsection. The smell of burned chitin filled the air as the creature's remains scattered across the purple sand. The other 2 creatures immediately withdrew, their shells shifting to deep amber colors as they retreated to a safe distance. Marcus kept the plasma cutter ready as he continued his work, but the creature seemed content to observe from afar rather than press another attack. Above, the alien observers noted this first successful defense with surprise. Most species that encountered Cathara Prime's native life forms died in the first encounter, either from being overwhelmed by superior numbers or from underestimating the creature's hunting intelligence. The human demonstrated rapid threat assessment and effective defensive response, Dr. Yelena reported to her colleagues. It also showed restraint in not pursuing the retreating creatures, suggesting tactical awareness of its limitations. Captain Mordak's translator unit conveyed his skeptical tone as he responded, "One small predator means nothing." The crystalline spiders will arrive soon, and there are no recorded instances of any species successfully defending against their pack tactics. Prey wrote, Marcus had managed to extract the emergency shelter framework and was beginning to transport his salvaged materials to a defensive position he'd identified near a cluster of the crystalline formations. The structures would provide natural windbreaks, while their mineral composition might help mask his thermal signature from any predators that hunted by heat detection. The shelter design taking shape in his mind was unlike anything he'd built before. Rather than fighting the hostile environment, he planned to work with it, using the planet's own geological features as part of his defense system. The steaming vents that dotted the landscape could provide geothermal energy, while the crystalline formations could be incorporated as both structural support and camouflage. As he began assembling the shelter framework, Marcus noticed changes in the behavior of the local wildlife. The small prismatic creatures had withdrawn entirely, while even the hardy desert plants seemed to be retracting their exposed surfaces. The air itself felt different, carrying new scents that triggered some deep survival instinct he didn't fully understand. In the distance, barely visible against the shimmering heat distortion from the twin suns, something large was moving across the desert toward his position. Marcus paused in his construction work and reached for his portable scanner, adjusting its settings to penetrate the atmospheric interference that plagued electronic equipment on Cathara Prime. What the scanner revealed made his blood run cold. Multiple large contacts were approaching from 3 different directions, moving with the coordinated precision of experienced hunters. Each contact measured approximately 2 meters in height and was accompanied by numerous smaller signatures that suggested pack behavior far more sophisticated than anything he'd encountered so far. The crystalline spiders had found him, and they were bringing friends. Marcus looked at his partially constructed shelter, then at the plasma cutter in his hands, then back at the approaching threats. Any reasonable person would have despaired at the odds. Instead, he felt something that had driven his species across continents, oceans, and eventually to the stars themselves. He felt the challenge, and he smiled. The real test was about to begin. Marcus had exactly 17 minutes before the crystalline spiders reached his position. His partially constructed shelter offered minimal protection against creatures that had evolved to hunt in coordinated packs on one of the galaxy's most lethal worlds. Instead of panic, however, he felt the familiar calm that had carried him through structural collapses, equipment failures, and impossible construction deadlines throughout his career. The key to surviving impossible situations was accepting that conventional solutions wouldn't work. Marcus abandoned his original shelter design and began implementing something far more ambitious and dangerous. Using his plasma cutter, he began cutting precise channels in the ground around his position, creating a network of trenches that led directly to the nearest cluster of steaming geothermal vents. Above in orbit, the alien observers watched with fascination as the human completely changed its defensive strategy. Dr. Elena adjusted her sensors to better understand what the creature was attempting. It appears to be modifying the terrain itself, she reported to the assembled fleet commanders. The human is creating some sort of channel system, but the purpose is unclear. Commander HFY studied the readouts from his tactical analysis systems. The modification appears to connect with the planet's geothermal network. This could be an attempt to weaponize the environment, but such tactics have never proven effective against crystalline spider packs. They were now visible to the naked eye, their transparent shells refracting the light from Cathara Prime's twin suns in ways that made them seem to flicker in and out of existence. Marcus counted at least 23 individuals in the main pack, with smaller groups flanking his position from both sides. Their coordination was remarkable, each individual moving to support the overall hunting strategy while maintaining optimal spacing to avoid friendly fire incidents. Third, Marcus finished cutting his channel network and began the most dangerous part of his plan. Using shaped charges from the ship's emergency kit, he created carefully positioned fractures in the bedrock beneath several of the larger geothermal vents. The explosions sent fountains of superheated steam and mineral-rich water shooting into the air, but more importantly, they increased the pressure in the underground system that fed his newly created channels. The first crystalline spider reached the edge of his defensive perimeter just as Marcus triggered his improvised system. Superheated steam and scalding water erupted from the channels he'd cut, creating a barrier of deadly heat between him and the approaching predators. The lead spider recoiled as its transparent shell was suddenly coated with mineral deposits from the geothermal water, destroying its natural camouflage and causing visible thermal stress fractures. But the pack adapted with frightening speed. Instead of pressing their attack through the steam barrier, the spiders began coordinating a flanking maneuver that would bring them around the edges of Marcus's defensive system. Their intelligence was clearly far beyond what he had anticipated, and they were learning from the failure of their initial approach. Marcus grabbed his emergency shelter framework and began assembling it directly over one of the larger steam vents. The superheated environment would be barely survivable even with environmental protection, but it might be the only way to create a defensive position the spiders couldn't easily assault. As he worked, he could hear the clicking sounds the creatures made as they communicated with each other, a complex language that seemed to convey tactical information across the entire pack. The first flanking group struck just as Marcus sealed himself inside the improvised shelter. 3 spiders launched themselves at the structure simultaneously, their crystalline limbs capable of punching through reinforced metal plating. Marcus had anticipated this, however, and had positioned the shelter so that any breach would immediately flood the interior with scalding steam from the vent below. The first spider's limb penetrated the shelter wall and was immediately subjected to temperatures exceeding 400 degrees Celsius. The creature's shriek of pain was unlike anything in Marcus's experience, a sound that seemed to resonate through his bones and trigger some primal fear response. But the spider withdrew its damaged limb, and the pack quickly adapted their tactics once again. Instead of direct assault, they began using their superior numbers to systematically probe his defenses. Individual spiders would dart in to test different approaches while the main pack maintained a safe distance. Learning from each interaction, Marcus realized he was facing an opponent that could outthink as well as overpower most adversaries. From orbit, the alien observers watched in amazement as the human not only survived the initial spider assault, but actually forced the pack to retreat and regroup. No previous expedition had managed to achieve anything beyond brief delays before being overwhelmed. "A remarkable," Dr. Yelena breathed as she recorded the encounter. "The human has demonstrated tactical flexibility that matches or exceeds the spider's own adaptability. It weaponized the environment in ways we never considered possible." Captain Mordak of the Iron Fang remained skeptical despite the evidence before him. "It has delayed the inevitable, nothing more. The spiders will find a weakness in its defenses, and when they do, the outcome will be the same as every other expedition." But even as he spoke, the human was implementing yet another unexpected strategy. Marcus had identified the spiders' coordination system as both their greatest strength and potential weakness. The complex clicking language they used to communicate required line-of-sight contact between pack members to function effectively. If he could disrupt their communications, he might be able to break their coordinated hunting behavior. Using components from his ship's sensor array, Marcus began constructing a sonic disruption system powered by the same geothermal energy that protected his shelter. The device would generate interference patterns specifically designed to interfere with the spider's clicking language, potentially causing confusion in their pack coordination. The engineering challenges were immense. A prison to make us a vision. Marcus had to work inside a shelter that was barely survivable, using tools that weren't designed for the hostile environment of Cathara Prime, while under constant threat from predators that had evolved to be perfect killing machines. Every minute brought new problems that required creative solutions using whatever materials he could salvage or improvise. The sonic disruptor came online just as the spider pack was preparing for another coordinated assault. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Instead of moving in perfect coordination, individual spiders began showing signs of confusion and disorientation. Their formation broke down as communication between pack members became impossible, and several individuals began moving in contradictory directions. Marcus seized the opportunity to expand his defensive perimeter. Using his plasma cutter and additional charges from the emergency kit, he created new steam channels and established secondary defensive positions among the crystalline formations. Each position was connected to the geothermal network and equipped with its own sonic disruption system, creating an integrated defensive network that could adapt to changing threats. The spider's response revealed just how intelligent these creatures truly were. Unable to coordinate through their normal communication methods, they began adapting by using visual signals and tactical movements that didn't require sound. Differences emerged who could direct smaller groups through body language and positioning, allowing them to maintain some level of coordination despite the sonic interference. Marcus watched this adaptation with professional admiration even as he worked to counter it. These creatures were demonstrating problem-solving abilities that rivaled human intelligence, combined with physical capabilities that far exceeded human norms. They were learning from each encounter and adjusting their tactics in real time, creating an evolutionary pressure that forced him to constantly innovate or die. The afternoon battle became a deadly game of move and countermove. Marcus would implement a new defensive measure, the spiders would adapt and find a weakness, and then he would have to develop another countermeasure before they could exploit their advantage. He pushed both the human and the alien pack to new levels of tactical sophistication. By the time Cathara Prime's primary sun began to set, Marcus had created a defensive network that incorporated geothermal weaponization, sonic disruption, malady. The spider pack had been reduced from 23 individuals to 17, with several others showing signs of injury from their encounters with the humans' increasingly sophisticated defenses. Above, the alien observers were recording everything with growing excitement and disbelief. What they were witnessing challenged fundamental assumptions about survival on death worlds and the capabilities of previously unknown species. The human has not merely survived, Dr. Elena reported in her official log. It has engaged in tactical evolution against one of the galaxy's most formidable predator species and achieved parity. This is unprecedented in our records. In Sale, Commander HFY found himself revising probability calculations that had seemed absolute just hours earlier. The creature's adaptability exceeds all known parameters. It has weaponized an environment that has killed thousands of beings from dozens of different species. As darkness fell over Cathara Prime, Marcus prepared for what he knew would be the most dangerous period. The crystalline spiders were primarily nocturnal hunters, evolved to take advantage of the planet's complex night environment. But he had learned something crucial during the afternoon's battle. These creatures were intelligent enough to be reasoned with, taught, and perhaps even negotiated with. The real question was whether a human structural engineer from Earth could find a way to communicate with crystalline spiders from a death world, and whether such communication could lead to something other than his death. Prime were about to discover that humans had evolved their own sophisticated survival strategies, and that sometimes the most dangerous predator was the one that refused to accept the role of prey. As Cathara Prime's twin suns disappeared below the horizon, the planet transformed into something even more alien and threatening. Bioluminescent plants began emerging from the cooling sand, casting an eerie blue-green glow across the crystalline formations. The temperature dropped rapidly, creating thermal currents that carried new scents and sounds across the desert landscape. Most ominously, the crystalline spiders began exhibiting behaviors that Marcus had not observed during the daylight hours. The remaining 17 members of the pack were spreading out across a much wider area, their transparent shells now pulsing with faint internal light that seemed to serve as a secondary communication system. Simple array, as the creatures established what appeared to be hunting territories, with each spider taking responsibility for monitoring specific approaches to his defensive position. Up. From his shelter above the geothermal vent, Marcus could feel the planet's night hunters beginning to stir. Larger creatures moved in the distance, their footsteps creating vibrations that traveled through the bedrock and into his carefully constructed defensive network. Some of these new arrivals were massive, based on the seismic signatures his sensors detected. The crystalline spiders, fearsome as they were, might not be the apex predators he would face during the long night ahead. Above in orbit, the alien observation fleet had been joined by additional vessels as word spread through Galactic Council networks about the unprecedented survival display taking place on Cathara Prime's surface. Representatives from 7 different species now watched in fascination as the human continued to not just survive, but actively improve his position during the planet's most dangerous period. Dr. Yelena had been monitoring the human's activities for nearly 12 hours, and what she observed continued to challenge her understanding of survival psychology. The creature shows no signs of the despair cascade that typically affects stranded individuals. Or, instead, it appears to be treating this situation as a complex engineering problem requiring innovative solutions. Commander HFY adjusted his ship's sensors to track the larger creatures now moving toward the human's position. It will need more than engineering solutions to survive what comes next. The night brings predators that make crystalline spiders seem harmless by comparison. Marcus was already aware of the approaching threats. His seismic monitoring system had detected at least 3 separate large creatures converging on his position from different directions. The largest registered on his sensors as approximately 6 meters in length and massing several tons. Whatever it was, moved with the steady, purposeful gait of something that had never learned to fear anything else on this planet. But Marcus had spent the last several hours doing more than just defending against spider attacks. He had been studying the planet's ecosystem, learning how different species interacted with each other and with the unique environment of Cathara Prime. What he had discovered gave him hope that survival might be possible through means other than constant warfare. The key insight had come from observing how the crystalline spiders reacted to the larger creatures approaching his position. Instead of maintaining their hunting formation, the spiders began withdrawing to positions that would allow rapid escape. Their behavior suggested a complex predator hierarchy where even apex hunters had to yield territory to larger threats. Marcus began implementing a strategy that would have seemed insane to any other species. Instead of hiding from the approaching mega-predators, he was going to try to redirect them toward each other. Using his understanding of the planet's thermal dynamics, he began creating scent trails and heat signatures designed to confuse the approaching creatures about the location of potential prey. The first to arrive was something Marcus privately labeled a crystal stalker, a serpentine creature whose translucent hide incorporated the same mineral structures found in the spider's shells. Round and as thick as his torso, it moved with sinuous grace that spoke of evolution in an environment where stealth was essential for survival. Its head bore 6 eyes arranged in a hexagonal pattern, suggesting vision capabilities far beyond human norms. Marcus watched from his concealed position as the crystal stalker investigated the false thermal signatures he had created using redirected geothermal steam. The creature was clearly intelligent, pausing frequently to analyze scents and sounds before moving forward. When it encountered one of his decoy heat sources, it investigated with the careful patience of a predator that had learned to be wary of traps. The second arrival was even more impressive. Marcus heard it before he saw it. A rhythmic pounding that seemed to shake the entire crystalline formation where he had established his defensive position. When it finally came into view, Marcus understood why the crystalline spiders had fled. The creature stood nearly 4 meters tall on 6 powerful legs, its armored carapace gleaming with the same prismatic patterns he had observed in smaller desert life forms. 2 massive claws extended from its front limbs, capable of crushing reinforced metal with ease. Marcus had privately named this species siege beetles, based on their obvious capability to demolish fortified positions. The creature showed immediate interest in his defensive installations, approaching the steam barriers with the confidence of something that had never encountered a challenge it couldn't overcome through sheer force. The critical moment came when both mega-predators detected each other's presence in Marcus's defensive perimeter. The crystal stalker's response was immediate. Its entire body became almost perfectly transparent as it activated what appeared to be advanced camouflage capabilities. The siege beetle's reaction was equally dramatic, its carapace shifting from prismatic patterns to deep red warning coloration as it prepared for combat. Marcus triggered his improvised distraction system at precisely the right moment. T-shaped charges detonated in sequence around his defensive perimeter, creating multiple false targets while flooding the area with contradictory thermal and chemical signatures. Both megapredators immediately assumed the other had triggered these explosions as part of a territorial challenge. The battle that followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. The crystal stalker attacked with lightning-fast strikes that could penetrate armor plating, while the siege beetle responded with crushing blows that shattered crystalline formations and sent shockwaves through the bedrock. Both creatures demonstrated combat capabilities that explained why previous expeditions to Cathara Prime had failed so completely. But Marcus wasn't just hiding and watching. While the 2 mega-predators fought, he was implementing the most ambitious phase of his survival plan. Using materials salvaged from his ship and resources gathered from the planet's unique ecosystem, he was constructing something that would fundamentally change his relationship with Cathara Prime's hostile environment. The structure taking shape in his workshop was part shelter, part fortress, and part ecosystem. Instead of fighting the planet's deadly characteristics, Marcus was creating a habitat that could channel and control those same forces. The vision would provide power and heat, while atmospheric processors would create breathable air. Most importantly, the design incorporated defensive systems that could adapt to new threats through modular expansion and technological integration. Third, the megapredator battle raged for nearly 2 hours before the Crystal Stalker finally managed to deliver a fatal blow to the siege beetle's sensory cluster. The surviving creature immediately began feeding on its defeated opponent, demonstrating scavenging behaviors that suggested it might be possible to coexist with such beings under the right circumstances. As the night progressed, Marcus encountered additional challenges that tested his growing understanding of Cathara Prime's ecosystem. Swarms of flying creatures with razor-sharp wing edges attempted to penetrate his defenses, only to be repelled by sonic barriers tuned to interfere with their navigation systems. Ground-dwelling parasites tried to infiltrate his shelter through microscopic cracks, forcing him to develop new filtration systems using mineral deposits found near the geothermal vents. Each encounter taught him something new about survival on a death world. The key was not to defeat every threat through superior force, but to understand the complex relationships between different species and environmental factors. By working with the planet's natural systems rather than against them, it became possible to find sustainable solutions to problems that had seemed insurmountable. Above in orbit, the alien observers were reaching conclusions that would reshape their understanding of survival psychology and adaptive intelligence. Dr. Elena compiled her preliminary report with growing excitement about the implications of what they were witnessing. The human has demonstrated adaptive capabilities that exceed our most optimistic projections, she reported to the assembled fleet commanders. Happens against each threat as it appears. The creature has begun to understand and manipulate the ecological relationships that govern survival on Cathara Prime. Captain Mordak, who had initially predicted the human's death within hours of landing, found himself revising assumptions that had seemed unshakable. The creature's tactical evolution has accelerated beyond known parameters. It is no longer merely surviving. It is beginning to dominate its environment through understanding rather than force. As Cathara Prime's primary sun began to rise, ending Marcus's first night on the planet, he stood atop his completed habitat and surveyed the transformed landscape around his position. The geothermal systems he had tapped provided reliable energy, while the defensive networks he had constructed offered protection against known threats. Most importantly, he had established working relationships with several species that had initially seemed intent on killing him. The crystalline spiders had returned as the night ended, but their behavior toward him had changed dramatically. Instead of viewing him as prey, they now seemed to regard him as another territorial predator deserving of cautious respect. The surviving crystal stalker had taken up residence in a thermal vent near his habitat, apparently attracted by the reliable food sources that Marcus's activities had created. Marcus had achieved something unprecedented in the recorded history of Cathara Prime. Not just survival, but the beginning of ecological integration. He was no longer fighting the planet's hostile environment, he was becoming part of it. But the greatest challenges still lay ahead. Cathara Prime's seasonal cycles would bring new threats and opportunities, while his growing understanding of the planet's ecosystem revealed complexities that would require ever more sophisticated solutions. The question was no longer whether he could survive, but whether he could thrive well enough to eventually find a way off this deadly world. The aliens watching from orbit were about to witness the true extent of human adaptability, ingenuity, and stubborn refusal to accept defeat. Marcus Chen was just getting started. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus Chen first set foot on Cathara Prime, and the planet had become something entirely different from the death world that had claimed thousands of previous visitors. Where once there had been empty desert punctuated by steaming vents and crystalline formations, now there stood a thriving ecosystem centered around the most sophisticated survival habitat ever constructed on a hostile world. Marcus's original shelter had evolved into a complex network of interconnected structures that sprawled across nearly a square kilometer of carefully terraformed terrain. Geothermal systems provided abundant clean energy while atmospheric processors maintained breathable air throughout the habitat complex. Hydroponic gardens flourished in controlled environments, supplemented by native plants that Marcus had successfully adapted for human consumption. Most remarkably, the entire installation existed in ecological balance with Cathara Prime's indigenous life forms. The crystalline spiders had become his unlikely allies and guardians. Through patient experimentation with sonic patterns and behavioral rewards, Marcus had established communication protocols that allowed for basic cooperation and information exchange. The spiders now patrolled the perimeter of his habitat, warning him of approaching threats in exchange for regular access to the abundant prey attracted by his activities. The crystal stalker that had claimed territory near his thermal processing station had proven to be far more intelligent than Marcus initially realized. The creature demonstrated problem-solving capabilities that rivaled human intelligence, and had begun actively participating in habitat maintenance by clearing debris and eliminating smaller pest species that threatened the delicate ecosystem Marcus had created. But perhaps the most impressive development was Marcus's relationship with the siege beetles. After the initial territorial battle he had witnessed, Marcus had realized these creatures were not mindless destroyers, but sophisticated engineers in their own right. Their natural ability to reshape crystalline formations had proven invaluable in expanding his habitat's defensive capabilities, while their territorial behavior provided an additional layer of protection against larger predators. From orbit, the alien observation fleet had grown to include representatives from over 30 different species, all drawn by reports of the impossible survival story unfolding on Kythara Prime's surface. What had begun as morbid curiosity about another doomed expedition had transformed into the most significant xenobiological study in Galactic Council history. Dr. Yelena had spent weeks documenting the humans' unprecedented integration with one of the galaxy's most hostile ecosystems. Her daily reports had become required reading at the highest levels of multiple governments, as the implications of what they were witnessing extended far beyond simple survival techniques. The human has achieved ecological integration that our best terraforming specialists considered theoretically impossible, she reported to the emergency council session that had been convened to discuss the situation. It has not conquered this environment through superior technology or force. It has become a keystone species that enhances the survival of all organisms within its sphere of influence. The political ramifications were staggering. If humans possessed natural capabilities for ecological integration that exceeded the Galactic Council's most advanced terraforming techniques, it would fundamentally alter the balance of power between species. Worlds that had been considered uninhabitable might become accessible through human expertise, while established colonies might benefit from human consultation on environmental challenges. Commander HFY found himself facing a decision that could affect interspecies relations for generations to come. Standing orders required that any stranded individuals be rescued if possible, but those same orders had been written with the assumption that survival on Kythara Prime was impossible. The human had not just survived, it had transformed the planet's most hostile region into a thriving ecosystem that could potentially be studied for decades. Down on the planet's surface, Marcus was implementing the final phase of his long-term survival strategy. Though, using components salvaged from his crashed ship and materials processed from the planet's unique mineral deposits, he had constructed a communications array powerful enough to reach the orbital observation fleet. The technical challenges had been immense, requiring him to develop new solutions for electromagnetic interference, atmospheric distortion, and power requirements that exceeded his habitat's normal capacity. The first transmission from Kythara Prime's surface in recorded history was brief and direct. "This is Marcus Chen of the UES Destiny's Edge, requesting communication with any vessels in orbit. I am in stable condition and prepared to discuss mutual assistance opportunities." The response from the alien fleet was immediate chaos. 37 different species attempted to establish contact simultaneously, creating a cacophony of competing transmission protocols that overloaded Marcus's improvised communication system. It took nearly an hour to establish orderly contact procedures and begin meaningful dialogue. Dr. Yelena became the primary liaison between Marcus and the observation fleet, her scientific background making her the most qualified to understand the technical achievements represented by his survival habitat. The initial conversations revealed just how significantly Marcus's presence had altered the fundamental nature of Kythara Prime's ecosystem. "Your integration with indigenous life forms exceeds our theoretical models for ecological compatibility," Dr. Yelena transmitted during their first extended conversation. "The symbiotic relationships you have established should not be possible given the known behavioral parameters of these species." Marcus's response revealed the depth of his understanding of the planet's complex ecosystem. The key was recognizing that aggression and territorial behavior were responses to resource scarcity and environmental stress. By creating abundance and providing reliable environmental conditions, it becomes possible to redirect those same behaviors toward cooperative outcomes. Detailed exchanges of information began between Marcus and the scientific teams aboard the observation vessels. The Prime's receptacle section, while the alien scientists provided him with detailed analysis of his habitat's long-term sustainability and suggestions for further improvements. The most significant breakthrough came when Marcus proposed a radical solution to the problem of his eventual rescue. Instead of leaving Cathara Prime and abandoning the ecosystem he had created, he suggested establishing a permanent research station that could serve as a model for ecological integration techniques on other hostile worlds. What I built here represents more than just a survival shelter, Marcus explained during a transmission to the assembled fleet commanders. It's a proof of concept for sustainable habitation on worlds previously considered uninhabitable. The techniques I've developed could be applied to dozens of planets throughout Council space, opening up new possibilities for expansion and resource development. The proposal created intense debate among the alien observers. Traditional protocols called for immediate evacuation of any survivors found on Deathworlds, but the unprecedented nature of Marcus's achievements raised questions about whether those protocols were appropriate in this situation. Captain Mordak, who had initially predicted Marcus's death within hours, now found himself advocating for allowing the human to remain on Cathara Prime. The creature has demonstrated capabilities that could revolutionize our approach to hostile environment colonization. The scientific value of continuing observations may outweigh rescue protocols. The debate was resolved when Marcus presented them with his most ambitious proposal yet. Using the habitat he had already constructed as a foundation, he planned to establish the first multi-species research station on Cathara Prime. Alien scientists could join him on the planet's surface to study ecological integration techniques, while contributing their own expertise to expanding and improving the habitat network. Dr. Elena was the first to volunteer for surface assignment, followed quickly by representatives from 6 other species. The prospect of studying ecological integration techniques firsthand proved irresistible to xenobiologists and environmental engineers throughout the observation fleet. The construction of Cathara Prime Research Station became the most ambitious interspecies cooperation project in recorded history. And environmental adaptation was combined with alien technologies and perspectives to create a facility that pushed the boundaries of what was possible on hostile worlds. Atmospheric processors, designed by the Altarians, worked alongside hegemony defensive systems and Vorthak geological engineering to create a research environment that could support dozens of different species simultaneously. 6 months after his crash landing, Marcus stood in the main observation dome of the completed research station and watched as the 3rd supply convoy arrived from orbit. Cathara Prime was no longer a death world that claimed every visitor. It had become a center for learning and cooperation that drew scientists and engineers from across the galaxy. The crystalline spiders had adapted to the presence of multiple alien species with remarkable flexibility, developing new communication protocols and cooperative behaviors that suggested intelligence far beyond what anyone had previously suspected. The siege beetles had become master builders, their natural engineering capabilities enhanced by collaboration with alien construction techniques. Most importantly, the ecosystem that Marcus had initiated around his original survival shelter had expanded to cover hundreds of square kilometers. Species that had previously competed for scarce resources now participated in complex symbiotic relationships that benefited all participants. Predator-prey relationships had evolved into cooperative behaviors that increased survival rates across the entire ecological network. The final transmission that Marcus sent to the Galactic Council summarized achievements that would be studied and emulated for generations. Cathara Prime Station is operational and requesting permanent designation as an interspecies research facility. We have successfully demonstrated that ecological integration techniques can transform uninhabitable worlds into thriving centers of scientific cooperation. Request permission to begin training programs for other hostile world colonization projects. Above, The observation fleet that had gathered to witness another tragic failure had instead documented the most significant advancement in xenobiology and ecological engineering in galactic history. The death world that had claimed thousands of lives had become humanity's greatest gift to interspecies cooperation and understanding. Dr. Yelena, now serving as the station's chief xenobiologist, compiled the final report that would change how the galaxy approached hostile environment colonization. The human Marcus Chen has demonstrated that survival on death worlds is not merely possible, but can serve as a foundation for unprecedented ecological and technological advancement. Recommended immediate expansion of human integration programs to other previously uninhabitable systems. Marcus Chen had done more than survive Cathara Prime. He had shown the galaxy what humans could accomplish when faced with impossible challenges. The death world had become humanity's introduction to galactic civilization, and it was an introduction that no one would ever forget.